The alarm stopped all at once. No warning. No buzzing. No red lights flashing. 1 second, ADX Florence was alive with noise. The clanging doors, guards shouting, cameras blinking. And the next, it was silent. Lieutenant Brooks froze. His hands hovered over the emergency console. The screens went black. No motion feeds. No warning messages. Nothing. Just empty gray squares where the monitors had been. A distant door slammed open. Boots echoed down a hallway. Guards ran toward the source, shouting into radios that emitted only static. Inmates moved in their cells, uncertain, whispering, sensing something wrong. The silence had weight. It pressed in, heavier than steel. Brooks' stomach dropped. This was impossible. The prison was designed so nothing could ever happen without the system noticing. Every door, every hallway, every cell was wired. Every alarm had backups. But every rule had exceptions. And someone, had just found it. In the control room, Warden Douglas stared at the black monitors. His voice was low, trembling. "We've lost everything." Total silence. Down the hall, Officer McKenna grabbed her radio. "Command, do you read me?" Static. Only static answered. Inmates in Block C pushed against their doors. One door clicked, then slid open by itself. A shadow moved in the dim emergency lights. A guard tripped and fell to the floor, groaning as someone, an inmate, slipped past him. The warden's eyes widened. This isn't a drill. Someone is moving. In Block C. Lieutenant Brooks tried to bring the system back online, fingers flying over the keyboard, but the screen stayed black. Not even the emergency manual reset was responding. It was as if the prison itself had shut down. Across the facility, cameras in other blocks flickered once and went dead. Door locks clicked open and closed randomly. Guards ran toward sounds, only to find empty corridors. Every step echoed, feeding panic, spreading fear. Inmate Daniel Cross had waited years for a night like this. He had watched, memorized patterns, counted guards, learned schedules. This moment, the system going silent, was his chance. Slowly, carefully, he moved from shadow to shadow, heading for the central floor. Lieutenant Brooks shouted into the radio again, desperation in his voice. "All units, lock down your sectors. Repeat, lock down immediately." No one obeyed. Not fully. Some doors would not respond. Others opened mid-command. A clanging sound filled the hallways as mechanical systems tried to compensate for something they could not see. From the top of the control room, Warden Douglas peered down at the darkened central floor. He had never seen ADX Florence like this. It was meant to be unbreachable. Imprisoned chaos, organized terror, controlled to the second. Tonight, it was chaos without order. Footsteps echoed closer. A guard ran past the control room doors, eyes wide with panic. Behind him, another door in cell block D banged open. In the DAC, an inmate emerged, moving fast, knowing he had seconds before anyone reacted. Brooks slammed his fist on the console. "We need a lockdown override. Now." The system stayed dead. The warden's voice dropped to a whisper. "We've lost control." Then, from somewhere deep within the prison, a loud metallic crash resounded. Steel groaned. Alarms that hadn't existed moments ago started screaming in fits. The floor above shifted violently, dust falling from the rafters. Lieutenant Brooks and the warden froze. From the darkness, a figure emerged on the central floor. One of the inmates, tall, moving fast, precise, headed straight toward the main control hub. Before anyone could react, another crash echoed from the far side of the floor. Guards screamed. Doors slammed shut randomly, trapping some officers inside. Others were cut off from backup. The warden swallowed hard. His eyes went wide. His getting to the system. Brooks' hands trembled over the dead console. The panic in the hallways seeped into the room. The alarms, the silence, the chaos, it all merged. The prison had gone silent, but the danger had never been louder. Marcus Hale, the inmate who had studied the control system, stepped closer to the central terminal. Dust hung in the air. Alarms groaned faintly, almost mechanical, almost alive. He reached out, fingers hovering over the manual override. Behind him, boots pounded the floor. Guards were close. They didn't know what they would find. The screen flickered faintly. One word appeared, access granted. Marcus' eyes widened. And then, the floor beneath the central hub trembled. Steel groaned. Something massive was moving toward them. The entire prison seemed to hold its breath. And in that moment, Lieutenant Brooks realized, ADX Florence, America's most secure prison, had gone completely silent, and no one knew if it would ever be heard again. The tremor ran through the central floor, rattling lights and shaking the metal grates beneath the guards' feet. Dust fell from the ceilings, mixing with the harsh red glow of the emergency lighting. The alarms were dead. Only the echo of boots and groaning steel remained. Marcus Hale didn't hesitate. He pulled the lever on the manual override with all his strength. Sparks flew. The console beeped once and then went silent again. The system had partially responded, but it wasn't enough. Doors throughout the prison began cycling open and closed unpredictably. Locks clicked and whirred. Some gates trapped guards inside. Others opened to empty corridors. Officer Brooks ran along the walkway, shouting into a dead radio. His heart pounded. The guards tried to regroup, but chaos spread faster than any command could reach them. Daniel Cross had already slipped from Block C into the long, narrow service corridors below the central floor. He moved silently, listening to every metallic creak. Years of observation had taught him where cameras were, where sensors failed, and how to exploit them. The silence of ADX Florence was his ally. The warden tried to assess the damage from the control room. Every screen flickered erratically. Some were dead. Others displayed multiple red alerts with no readable information. The word system failure, partial control flashed repeatedly. Down in the corridors, Cross paused. Ahead, a steel door was ajar, exposing a maintenance stairwell. He could hear guards nearby, shouting and tripping over each other. One raised his flashlight, sweeping across the hall, but it was too late. Cross slipped up the stairs, silent as a shadow. On the central floor, Marcus Hale faced another dilemma. The manual override lever had only triggered a partial reset. Some doors had responded. Others remained locked. Panic spread among the guards as they realized that the system was no longer fully functional. Every corner of the prison had become unpredictable, dangerous. A distant crash echoed from Block B. Another door had swung open unexpectedly, sending a guard tumbling across the hallway. A few inmates took advantage of the chaos, slipping past cell doors that should have remained locked. Their eyes were wide with fear and excitement. Brooks screamed orders, but the radio was dead. The warden's voice came through, steady but tense. Contain what you can. Move toward the central floor. Now. Marcus knew it wasn't enough. The system had chosen speed over safety. Every action now risked more collapse. But the central terminal was the only hope of regaining partial control. Suddenly, the ground shook again. Metal groaned above them. A walkway, weakened by years of wear and the sudden system failures, shifted dangerously. Sparks rained down from exposed wiring. A guard shouted a warning, too late. A massive steel walkway collapsed onto the central floor, smashing into a group of officers. Marcus ducked, rolling behind a console. The sound of twisting metal and shattering panels filled the room. Dust choked the air. The alarms were still silent. Through the chaos, he saw Cross emerging from the shadows of a side corridor. Daniel moved toward the chaos, unafraid, taking advantage of every misstep and every open door. Marcus grabbed the emergency keys that Cross tossed toward him. In seconds, he could attempt another reset. But the response teams were closing in. They were trained, armed, ready, but unprepared for a prison that had gone completely silent and unpredictable. The warden's face appeared on a cracked monitor, his expression grim. "You don't understand what you've unleashed," he said. Marcus barely heard him. He focused on the lever and the console. One pull could stabilize part of the prison, but it could also trigger more collapse if he failed. The floor trembled again. Sparks flew. And then, from deep below the central floor, a deafening metallic roar erupted. Something, massive, was moving through the tunnels, directly beneath them. Guards froze. Marcus froze. Cross froze. The entire prison, ADX Florence, held its breath. And no one knew if it would survive the night. The roar from below reverberated through the metal floors and walls of ADX Florence. Dust fell like rain from the ceiling. The emergency lights flickered violently, casting long, jagged shadows across the central floor. Marcus Hale's heart pounded, but he forced himself to focus. Every second counted. Daniel Cross scanned the area quickly. The response teams were closing in, moving cautiously but too slowly. Every misstep they made gave the inmates an advantage. He could see the panic in the guards' posture, the hesitation, the confusion. The prison was designed to be unbreachable. Tonight, it had failed. Marcus approached the manual override console again. The keys in his hand felt heavy. One wrong move and the system could either lock them out forever or trigger another collapse. He glanced at the central floor. Debris from the fallen walkway lay scattered. Some guards were pinned under twisted metal, moaning, blood streaked along their uniforms. Others scrambled over the wreckage, shouting into radios that emitted only static. A distant alarm went off, not from the central system, but a mechanical backup that had partially activated. It was weak, intermittent, almost mocking in its failure. Cross slipped silently along the edge of the room, moving closer to Marcus. Above them, the upper walkway groaned. Sparks flew from exposed wires. Every movement sent vibrations through the building. The warden's face appeared on one monitor, distorted by interference. His voice was calm but laced with tension. "This is no longer a drill. Do not underestimate them." Marcus didn't reply. He focused on the lever. Slowly, he pulled it. The system responded partially. Some doors clicked into place, sealing off sections of the prison. Others remained unlocked or opened unpredictably. Panic spread like wildfire. Inmates in Block D rushed through corridors, some screaming, others moving silently, taking advantage of the chaos. From below, the metallic roar grew louder. Something massive was navigating the maintenance tunnels. Dust fell from the ceiling as the vibrations shook loose more debris. The sound of groaning metal echoed through the facility, mingling with shouts, alarms, and screams. Cross reached Marcus. "We don't have much time," he said. "Whatever's coming from below, it's heading straight for us." Marcus nodded, hands trembling. The keys jingled in his pocket. He activated a secondary override panel, hoping to regain some control over the locks above. A few doors closed as intended, trapping guards and inmates in separate sections. But the effort was only partially successful. The floor trembled again. A massive crash erupted from the west wing. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, sending debris onto a group of officers. They scrambled, shouting, trying to regroup. Marcus and Cross ducked behind a console, covering their heads as dust rained down. Through the chaos, Marcus noticed something unexpected. One of the newly opened doors led directly to a maintenance corridor that bypassed most of the central surveillance points. It was a narrow passage, dark and forgotten, but it was a path forward. Cross looked at him. "This is it. If we move now, we might survive." Marcus hesitated. Every step carried risk. Above, the remaining walkways shuddered. Sparks flew. Another panel collapsed near the central console. Guards shouted orders, but they went unheard over the chaos. Then, from the tunnel below, a deafening metallic crash sounded. The floor trembled violently. Dust and small debris rained down. A massive steel support beam shifted, leaning dangerously toward the central floor. Guards screamed. Some ran. Others froze. Marcus grabbed the keys and sprinted toward the corridor. Cross followed. Behind them, the central floor erupted in chaos. Alarms attempted to start again but failed. Lights flickered. The building groaned. And in that instant, a massive section of the central walkway collapsed entirely, sending steel and concrete plummeting toward the lower floors. Marcus and Cross dove for cover. Dust and sparks filled the air. Screams echoed. When the dust settled, the central floor lay in ruins. Debris blocked several hallways. Several guards were injured or trapped. And from the shadows of the damaged corridor, Marcus and Cross could see it, movement. Something massive had emerged from the tunnels below. ADX Florence had gone silent. But the danger had only just begun. The underground tunnels groaned as the massive figure moved through them. Dust and debris swirled in the weak emergency lights. Marcus Hale and Daniel Cross pressed themselves against the wall, barely breathing, watching shadows shift in the darkness. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat of impending disaster. Above, ADX Florence still struggled to regain control. Emergency lights flickered erratically. Doors opened and closed on their own. Guards shouted orders that went unheard. Every hallway was a maze of confusion and fear. The warden's calm authority had eroded. Even he now moved with tension visible in every motion. Marcus motioned toward the narrow passage ahead. "This way. We have a chance to get further underground before they reach us." Cross nodded. They moved cautiously, their shoes clanging softly on the concrete floor. Every corner could hold danger, guards, fallen debris, or worse, the massive thing that had emerged from the tunnels. Back on the central floor, Lieutenant Brooks tried to rally the remaining officers. The floor above had partially collapsed. Steel and concrete blocked major walkways. Some of the response teams were trapped in dead-end corridors. Panic was spreading faster than any organized plan could contain it. Marcus and Cross reached a junction where the tunnel split. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping water. Rusted maintenance lights flickered. One path led upward toward administrative levels. The other sloped downward into deeper, abandoned sections of the prison. Cross glanced down. This is the part they forgot about. No cameras, no patrols. Completely off the grid. Marcus hesitated. We'll have to go down. It's our only chance. As they descended, the ground trembled again. Something heavy moved in the tunnels above, rattling the support beams. Sparks flew from exposed wiring. Dust fell from the ceiling, coating their clothes. In the control room, the warden and Brooks watched helplessly. The emergency systems were failing one by one. Every attempt to regain control triggered new malfunctions. Doors locked and unlocked unpredictably. Alarms beeped sporadically, each one adding to the confusion. Deep in the tunnels, Marcus and Cross reached a massive metal door. It had been welded shut years ago, a forgotten barrier to old maintenance corridors. The legacy panel beside it flickered faintly green. Marcus placed his hand on the lever. If we can get this open, we might reach the old service passages and bypass the chaos above. Cross glanced back. Hurry. Whatever's loose in this prison isn't waiting. Marcus yanked the lever. The door shuddered, then slowly creaked open. Dust poured from the gap. The air was thick with rust and the smell of stagnant water. They stepped inside, moving carefully. The passage was narrow, winding, and dark. Pipes lined the walls. Every step echoed ominously. The sound of the massive presence above grew fainter but remained menacing, like a heartbeat they couldn't see. Suddenly, a loud metallic crash reverberated from above. The ground shook violently. Part of the tunnel near the entrance collapsed. Dust and debris fell, cutting off the way back. Cross grabbed Marcus' arm. We're trapped. There's no turning back now. Marcus swallowed hard. Then we keep moving forward. A faint green light pulsed along the far wall. Marcus approached and saw it was an old control console, long forgotten. The label read Legacy Override System. He hesitated. This could stabilize part of the prison, or it could trigger more chaos. Are you ready? Cross nodded. We don't have a choice. Marcus pulled the first lever. Sparks shot from the panel. The floor trembled beneath them. Somewhere above, a door slammed shut. Then the hum of machinery grew louder. Pipes rattled. Steel groaned. And from deep within the tunnels, a deafening roar sounded, a sound that shook the very foundations of ADX Florence. Marcus and Cross froze, staring into the darkness ahead. The prison had gone silent above, but below, something alive and unstoppable was awakening. The ground beneath them began to vibrate violently. Debris shifted, and the tunnel ahead started collapsing. They had seconds to move, or be buried alive. The tunnel shook violently, dust raining down from the cracked ceiling. Marcus Hale and Daniel Cross sprinted forward, dodging falling debris and jagged pieces of concrete. Every step echoed ominously, the sound magnified by the narrow passage. Above them, the prison groaned like a living creature, struggling to hold itself together. Behind, a massive steel support beam shifted, scraping against the walls. The metallic screech sounded like a warning. Marcus grabbed Cross' arm. Keep moving. Don't look back. The green glow from the Legacy Override console faded as they pushed further into the tunnels. Pipes rattled overhead. Water dripped steadily, forming puddles along the uneven floor. Their shoes slipped in the wet patches, but neither dared to slow. Above ground, chaos continued unabated. Lieutenant Brooks and the remaining guards tried desperately to regain control. The central floor was a mess of twisted metal, broken glass, and dust. Officers shouted into radios that produced only static. Doors opened and slammed shut at random, trapping both guards and inmates. Every step was dangerous, every hallway a potential death trap. Marcus and Cross reached a junction where the tunnels split again. One path led deeper into forgotten maintenance corridors, the other angled upward toward the prison's lower levels. Cross glanced at the upward route. Too risky. The main floors are unstable. We could be crushed if the ceiling collapses again. Marcus nodded. Then we go deeper. They took the descending passage. The darkness was thick, almost suffocating. The only light came from Marcus' small flashlight and the faint green glow from emergency panels along the walls. Every sound seemed amplified, the drip of water, the scuff of shoes, the distant groan of the prison above. Suddenly, a loud metallic crash echoed behind them. The floor trembled violently. Dust and small rocks fell, blocking parts of the passage. Cross jumped over a fallen beam, narrowly avoiding a jagged edge. Marcus followed. A faint rumbling grew louder. Something massive was moving through the tunnels above them, sending vibrations through the earth. It was a sound that promised destruction, a sound that reminded them how small and vulnerable they were in a prison designed to hold the worst criminals in America. Marcus spotted a small service hatch in the tunnel wall. "This way," he said, tugging it open. Inside was a narrow crawl space, just wide enough for them to slip through. They moved in single file, the space tight and suffocating. The rumbling above intensified. Pipes rattled violently. The ground shook. Dust and debris rained down from cracks in the ceiling. The walls seemed to close in around them. Suddenly, the passage shifted beneath Marcus' feet. The floor tilted dangerously, and he stumbled, grabbing a rusty pipe to steady himself. Cross steadied him. Marcus swallowed hard. "We can't stop. Not now." They crawled forward, reaching the end of the tunnel, which opened into a small maintenance chamber. The room was cluttered with old machinery, rusted pipes, and unused equipment. In the center stood a panel labeled Emergency System Access. Marcus approached it cautiously. "This is it. If we can get this online, we might stabilize part of the prison." Cross kept watch near the entrance. The tremors were growing stronger. Dust fell from the ceiling in heavier sheets. Marcus pulled the lever on the emergency access panel. Sparks flew. The lights flickered. Some doors in the prison above clicked into place, but others remained open. The system responded partially. Then a deafening crash echoed from deep within the tunnels. A massive section of the prison's infrastructure had given way. The vibration knocked Marcus off balance. He caught himself on the edge of the panel. Cross yelled, "Move. Now." They sprinted back toward the crawlspace entrance. Behind them, the tunnel began collapsing in slow motion. Chunks of concrete and twisted metal fell, blocking the path. The rumble grew louder, echoing through the labyrinth of ADX Florence. They squeezed through the crawlspace, narrowly avoiding falling debris. Dust and sparks filled the air. Every heartbeat was a countdown. When they emerged into a larger maintenance chamber, the emergency lighting revealed a horrifying sight. A portion of the upper tunnel had completely caved in, trapping both inmates and guards. Screams echoed faintly through the rubble. Marcus and Cross froze. They were safe for the moment, but the prison above was crumbling, the inmates were moving, and the massive presence below was still advancing. ADX Florence had gone silent. But the danger, raw, unpredictable, unstoppable, was only getting worse. The maintenance chamber was dimly lit, filled with the smell of dust, rust, and electricity. Marcus Hale and Daniel Cross crouched behind a stack of old machinery, listening. The tremors above had subsided slightly, but the vibrations beneath their feet reminded them that the chaos was far from over. From somewhere deep in the tunnels, a metallic groan reverberated. It was low, deliberate, and unmistakably heavy. The massive presence below had not stopped moving. Every step it took shook the floor, sending tiny shards of concrete cascading from the ceiling. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow. "We can't stay here. We need to move deeper before whatever's down there finds us." Cross nodded. "There's an old service ladder at the far end. It leads to another maintenance level. Maybe we can get some distance from all the chaos above." They started toward the ladder, careful with every step. The floor was littered with debris from previous collapses. Old pipes hung dangerously from the ceiling. One wrong move, and the entire passage could collapse. Above, ADX Florence was still a war zone. Guards tried desperately to regain control, but the system was unpredictable. Some doors locked permanently, trapping officers inside. Others opened without warning, letting inmates slip into hallways they shouldn't have access to. The emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows. Every corner was a trap. In the tunnels below, Marcus and Cross reached the ladder. Rusted and groaning under its own weight, it seemed barely capable of holding them. Cross tested it first. It held. They began their slow ascent, hands gripping the metal rungs tightly. Halfway up, a loud crash echoed from the lower tunnels. A massive piece of debris fell, hitting the ground with a force that sent a shockwave through the chamber. Dust and smoke filled the air. Marcus and Cross froze, listening intently. The metallic groan returned, louder this time. Something massive was moving closer, shuffling through the tunnels with the weight of steel and stone. Every vibration told them it was not human. Marcus reached the top of the ladder first. He glanced back. "Come on, hurry." Cross followed, climbing as quickly as possible. The moment he reached the top, another tremor shook the floor beneath them. The ladder swayed dangerously, and a pipe overhead snapped, falling toward them. They ducked just in time. Above them, the maintenance chamber connected to a long-abandoned service corridor. Dust and cobwebs lined the walls. Rusted emergency lights flickered faintly, illuminating the narrow path ahead. Marcus moved cautiously. If we can get to the control tunnel, we might regain more access to the prison's systems. Cross nodded, keeping his eyes on every shadow, and avoid whatever's moving below. The corridor was narrow and winding. Every step echoed loudly, carrying through the tunnels below. They could hear distant shouts from the guards above and faint cries from trapped inmates. Suddenly, a metallic clanging echoed from behind a corner. Marcus froze. Cross whispered, "Someone, or something, is coming." They pressed themselves against the wall. The sound of footsteps, or heavy machinery, grew louder. Dust shifted along the edges of the corridor. A shadow appeared at the far end, moving slowly but deliberately. It wasn't human. It was too large, too heavy, and the vibrations it created were unmistakable. Marcus swallowed hard. "We have to move. Now." They sprinted down the corridor, ducking under low pipes and avoiding broken panels. The shadow behind them followed, moving with terrifying precision. Up ahead, a set of double doors marked control access, restricted loomed. Marcus ran toward them, pulling the emergency key from his pocket. Cross glanced back. The massive figure in the tunnels below was gaining on them. Every step shook the ground. Marcus reached the doors and swiped the key. Sparks flew. The lock clicked open. They pushed the heavy doors just as a loud crash from the tunnels below shook the corridor violently. Dust and small debris fell from the ceiling, but they were inside. The room was dark, filled with old terminals, blinking lights, and stacks of control panels long forgotten. Marcus dropped to his knees at a terminal. "If we can bring this system online, even partially, we can stop the chaos spreading through the prison." Cross stood near the entrance, listening. The shadow in the tunnels growled, a deep, metallic sound that vibrated through the floor. Marcus began working the terminal, fingers flying over the old keys. The lights flickered. A faint hum of power returned. Some screens activated, displaying partial feeds from various sections of the prison. Then the ground shook violently again. Pipes rattled overhead. Sparks flew. The massive presence below was still moving, relentless, unstoppable. Marcus' fingers froze over the terminal. He knew one wrong move could make everything worse. From somewhere deep in the tunnels, a deafening metallic roar echoed, louder than ever before, and the floor beneath them trembled. Dust rained down. The night at ADX Florence was far from over. The prison had gone silent in some areas. But the danger, real, massive, and unstoppable, was closing in. The control room was dim, flickering with the faint light of partially restored monitors. Marcus Hale's fingers flew over the old terminal, trying to stabilize the system. Each keystroke produced a faint beep or a spark, but the screens only gave glimpses of chaos, hallways blocked by debris, doors swinging open and shut, shadows moving where none should be. Daniel Cross kept watch near the entrance, listening intently. The metallic roar from the tunnels below had faded slightly, but it hadn't disappeared. Every vibration through the floor reminded them that something massive and dangerous was still moving beneath the prison. Marcus paused, staring at the feeds. A section of Block D showed a group of inmates pushing against a door, trying to escape. Another door in the administrative wing had locked a pair of guards inside. The chaos was spreading, and it was unpredictable. Cross whispered, "We can't just sit here. We need to do more than just watch the screens." Marcus nodded. "I know. If I can bring enough of this system online, I can isolate sections of the prison, lock down key areas, maybe even trap them before more damage happens." The terminal sparked again. Dust fell from the ceiling. Every flash of light made shadows dance across the walls, creating illusions of movement. They both froze at a sudden clanging from above. The collapsed walkways had shifted again. Steel scraped against steel. Marcus focused. He toggled switches, rerouted emergency power, and activated backup protocols. Slowly, the doors on the screens began responding. Some locked, some unlocked, but the system was far from fully functional. A sudden vibration ran through the floor. Marcus looked up, eyes wide. The massive figure from the tunnels had shifted position. Its movements were deliberate, testing the prison's structure. Another section of the ceiling above trembled. Dust and small debris fell, rattling the old control panels. Cross grabbed Marcus' arm. "We need to move closer to the main hallway. If that thing breaks through the tunnels, this room won't hold us." Marcus nodded. He grabbed a flashlight and emergency keycard. They sprinted down a narrow maintenance passage that led toward the central floor. Every step echoed, and every vibration reminded them that the prison above was still unstable. As they reached the junction leading back to the central floor, a deafening crash echoed from the west wing. Part of the upper walkway had collapsed completely, sending steel and concrete plummeting. Guards ran, shouting. Inmates screamed. Marcus and Cross ducked behind a metal support column, trying to stay clear of falling debris. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. The emergency lights flickered again, casting long, jagged shadows. Marcus whispered, "We have to keep moving. That figure is coming, and the longer we stay in one place, the more likely it is to find us." Cross nodded. "Do you think it's human?" Marcus shook his head. "No. It's too big, too deliberate, too powerful. Whatever it is, it's testing the prison's limits." They moved cautiously through the corridor, navigating fallen pipes and broken panels. Every step was a gamble. Above, somewhere in the chaos of ADX Florence, doors continued to swing unpredictably. Lights flickered. Alarms wailed intermittently. As they reached the central floor, Marcus glanced back at the maintenance passage. Dust and shadows swirled, and he could feel the presence behind them, moving through the tunnels like a predator hunting its prey. They paused near a collapsed walkway. The central floor was a battlefield of metal, debris, and chaos. Guards shouted, inmates scrambled, alarms tried to start but failed. Marcus looked at Cross. "We can stabilize part of the prison from the old control hub ahead, but we'll have to cross the floor. It's risky. Extremely risky." Cross swallowed hard. "We don't have a choice. Let's go." They ran, dodging falling debris and shifting metal. Sparks flew from exposed wiring. Every step brought them closer to the old control hub, and closer to the massive presence lurking beneath the prison. As they reached the entrance, a deafening metallic roar shook the central floor. Dust rained from the ceiling. Steel twisted. Alarms wailed one final, broken note. Marcus and Cross froze. ADX Florence had gone silent above. But the terror below, the unstoppable, massive threat, was about to make itself known. And in that moment, the entire floor trembled violently, as if the prison itself were about to collapse.